This is Next Radio 2017 with Broadcast Bionics.
Hi, I'm Megan, and I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but I am a pod person. And by pod person, I mean in the true science fiction form of the word. At one point in the past, 5 years, the old Megan was snatched up into the unknown and replaced with a cyborg whose true purpose in life is to listen to as many podcasts as possible every single week. Now, the old Megan loves spoken word. She listens to most of her spoken word live. Occasionally, she would download an episode or two for some catch-up listening. But the new Megan listens to all of her spoken word on podcasts, and she's really deep into the back catalog of the Stuff You Missed in History Class podcast. And, that's a little concerning because the old Megan didn't even like history. She missed a lot of stuff in history class. But I'm a pod person, and you probably know this. There are more pod people out there. I'd like to introduce you to some.
Song. I'm not sure it's inveigled me because I'm not sure.
I've subscribed to 27 podcasts. Switched on Pop is one of my very favorite ones. I listen to Up First every morning.
Another Round, Death, Sex, and Money.
Oh, Art of Charm.
Oh, NPR Politics Podcast. I love that one.
It's called Filthy Casuals, and it's like a video game-based one.
The other one is called Sex with Emily, which is about dating and relationship stuff too.
For years when on radio, we stopped working.
If I get stuck in traffic, sometimes I'm excited about that because it means I'll get to listen to another story or another podcast or finish what I'm listening to.
I didn't realize that there's like every nuance that you could imagine. There's usually a podcast for that. So I felt like since then, it's just really expanded me as a person.
I had opinions on certain things. I thought was like, how can anybody see it any different? And then I listened to these podcasts and then I'm like, this comes at it from a whole different angle. Now I can see why somebody's doing this other thing or believes this other way.
Researching podcasting for over a decade. Here we see podcast familiarity from our Infinite Dial study. In 2017, an estimated 168 million Americans are familiar with the term podcasting. But actually, only about a quarter of Americans listen to podcasts. So we wanted to do more research to figure out how to increase podcasting's share of ear. And we did it with our Share of Ear study. It's a national representative survey of Americans 13+. It's a huge study. Thousands of people fill out audio diaries. And to truly represent the US population, we have the people who don't have access to online for an online survey. They fill out their diary on a paper diary. Now, what they fill out, they tell us about their audio listening. They tell us about the time, the location, the platform that they're listening, and the device. And more importantly, for this presentation, they tell us if they're listening to speech or music audio. Now, keeping in mind this is a one-day diary, during this diary, 86% of Americans said that they listen to music each day. And then 41% of Americans 13+ listen to speech each day. Now, when we factor in time to the equation, this is our audio listening by content type. 25% of the time of audio listening goes to speech. Now, if you're a podcaster, this is your market share. You need to think about speech, audio, and music as two completely separate tracks. Pay attention to that 25%, and that's really what we're going to concentrate for the rest of this presentation. Now, if we look at that same donut, the audio listening by content, by just speech listeners, you can see the speech percentage jumps to almost half of their listening. So that, again, this is listening time. And where are people listening to speech? Well, it's pretty much the same amount of people are listening in the car as they are in home at 58%, and less people are listening at work or in other places. But again, when you factor in time, at home is the largest number. 58% of the time of listening to speech audio happens in the home, followed by in the car, at work, and other locations. And when are people listening to speech audio? This is the portion of the population listening to speech in each hour, and you can see it peaks just during the breakfast shows between 6 and 9 a.m. There's also a smaller peak in the afternoon drive. And then this is the share of time spent listening to speech. We have podcasts. The podcast share of ear is 11%. Now, if you compare that to broadcast radio, it's about a sixth of the size. And that's pretty amazing given the amount of time that podcasting has been around. Now, although the total is 11% for podcast share, when you look at it by age, it really varies. Younger Americans are listening to a lot more speech through podcasts than older Americans. But this gives you an idea of where things are going in the future. Now, if we look at the share of speech by podcast listeners, we see that podcast number jump. And this is where we see evidence of those pod people that I mentioned. Because over, 59% of the time of speech listening goes to podcasts. And then that's almost half as much as the AM/FM radio number. So if you are someone who listens to podcasts, use that time listening to podcasts really, really expands. And we wanted to know where it's coming from. So we decided to do a little more research. In addition to all the quantitative research that I've showed you, we decided to sit down with some podcast listeners and ask them about their listening. And we asked them to start, where does this listening come from? So here they are.
I say if there's one thing that I curtailed 100%, I was a Howard Stern fanatic. It was all I listened to for like the first couple hours in the morning. And I got overwhelmed with keeping track of the show. And I was like, I'm gonna stop that, and then I brought in the podcasts.
I definitely listen to music less, and almost to a fault. Sometimes I'll find myself like needing that extra boost that I would get from music, but I almost preferentially listen to podcasts now. Yeah. Just there's so many to listen to that any available bit of time, I'll choose a podcast just to like knock them out and just kind of get as much in as I can.
And I would say that now, probably more time, especially at work, I would have listened to music before, but now I'd rather just listen to a podcast instead of music.
I barely listen to music anymore. I listen to music when I'm in school, because I'm going to grad school part-time. So let's say I have to write a paper and I can't really focus on words, I'll put music on. But outside of that, if I'm just playing video games or whatever, I'll definitely put a podcast on.
I still listen to FM radio, but that's because I want to get a new car at some point down the future, so I'm not going to put a new stereo. My car's older. So I still listen to FM radio in the car, but if I had a different car with a different stereo, that would probably go away.
I'm not, I have to do all these different steps now to get my podcast to play through my USB port. And until I figured out what I needed to do to get it to work, I was stuck listening to the radio for a couple days in the morning, and it was terrible because it's all the same songs over and over again. And if you get into a cycle where all the stations are playing the same thing and then all going to commercial, I know I'm never going back from podcasts.
So podcasting may be starting to replace radio, at least for the listeners that we spoke to. Now, talk radio is a bit different in the States than it is here in the UK, but I do think it's worth digging a little deeper to talk to these Americans and see what they think about radio.
It just sounded like boring radio to me. Honestly, I just thought it sounded like talk radio, which in a sense it is, but I didn't realize how just expansive the selection is.
I think that with podcasts, people are able to take risks and explore some subjects that maybe might not be appropriate, or there might be some anxiety about broadcasting it live over the radio. So I do think that some of the topics they tackle are more in depth or more personal than they might have been elsewhere on the radio.
I don't know, because I don't think radio hosts are dumb per se. So I wouldn't even go in that direction. I guess it's just maybe some of the podcasts are younger, so their humor is a little bit more in line with the humor that I have.
I hated talk radio. That there was so much. I guess there still is, but I don't even know anymore because I never listened to it. So much commercials with talk radio, especially like news talk. Whew. It was for 10 minutes of audio that you're listening to on the radio. You got 5 minutes of commercials. I don't know if that's an exact ratio, but it felt like 50-50.
I'm sorry, broadcasters, for that video. But if you've ever tried to explain podcasting to someone who's not familiar, you may have told them it's talk radio on demand. And for at least those Americans, that doesn't sound so appealing. Talk radio to them is a bunch of old guys shouting about politics or sports. But we know podcasting is not that at all. It is so much more. It can be anything you want it to be. You can pick a subject and there's probably a podcast there for you. But we just have to make sure that people can find it, right? So discovery is definitely a topic that we want to dig in a little deeper. Let's see how these Americans are discovering their podcasts.
Friends, a lot of people are they start their own podcast, and some of them fall off, some of them don't. And then also obviously discovery through Google Play or through WNYC, what they found in their sidebar and stuff like that, and then recommendations that come along.
I'll look for something that's in my interest on Reddit or on Facebook, but usually those recommendations are coming from other people, so that's kind of how I find stuff.
Word of mouth is big. People know I like listening to podcasts, so if they find something before me, my friends are typically excited to tell me. Podcasts, we'll talk about other podcasts. There'll be advertising on podcasts. If you like this, you might like that. I read about them. I know I found some from New York Times articles or other things online.
Sometimes I'll look up a topic on the search and I'll go to kind of podcasts, and they organize them and kind of display a rating. And so I'll go to the higher rated ones. So the rating does influence me because there's a lot out there and it's hard to just give everybody a listen. Definitely if a friend recommends one to me, that usually kind of propels me in to check them out.
Sometimes, on the radio or on the podcasts, they won't do their own episode. They'll play another podcast. For example, one time Snap Judgment, they had this guy Shannon Kaysen, and he did a whole it was just one of his shows, but it was Snap Judgment presents Shannon Kaysen, and it showed me a new show, and then I subscribed to it. And that happened the same thing with Mogul, and there's a few other ones. Usually they'll every once in a while they'll just send you a different show to try out, and that's actually how I subscribe to a lot of them now that I think about it.
So word of mouth is important, right? If it's so important, we really need to understand how to talk about podcasts. So one last time, I'd like to go back to our podcast experts, the listeners.
I like to listen to podcasts because I enjoy it, and sometimes I'll listen to stuff that's industry related, and so I get to educate myself on stuff that can help my business.
They're just really entertaining, and I like the combination of at least the stuff I listen to for the most part. It's entertaining, but also you learn something new.
It's almost like audiobooks where you get to you can listen to something you can learn while you're driving. And unlike audiobooks, I feel, so there are times where I can tune in and tune out. It's not as high stakes as trying to listen to a book and catch everything.
And they're a great way to kind of expand the minutes of your day by, learning something new or trying something new. And I know they've really influenced my behavior patterns and maybe some of the ways that I relate to friends and my family.
I'm able to really tailor the topics I'm interested in hearing more about, or the type of coverage I want, the subject areas they look at, and even whether I'm in the mood for something humorous or more serious, or do I want to learn something. So I'm really able to curate my day and what I want to hear.
If you follow one sports team, for instance, you can find so many podcasts about that one team that cater to every part of it, that it's really nice. Because then it kind of makes you feel like you're part of the community.
These people we talked about wanting to learn something new every day. They talked about the way that their favorite shows make them feel. They talk about the content. And that's the first of the 3 things I want you to take away from today. And that's, you need to explain the content, not the tech of podcasting. When we first started researching this space, the tech was a little sketchy. People didn't really understand downloading, syncing, but a lot of that friction has gone away. And we really just need to focus our messaging on the content because people love it. Now, we are so lucky, the podcasting world is so lucky, to have such passionate fans that they will go and tell everyone they know about this podcast that they love, and you have to listen to it right away. And that's really great. And these same people will also just dig into to podcasting and find the next show and the next show and the next show. They are looking for themselves. Now, word of mouth, self-discovery, that's all really great for the world of podcasting. And yeah, I still hear people say, oh, discovery's not so great. We can be better with discovery. Now, my colleague Tom Webster likes to say that discovery is a pull strategy. Podcasting needs a push strategy. Last year, at this very conference, Tom called for the podcasting industry to have some type of campaign. The general public needs some explanation of the benefits of podcasting, and I really challenge you to do that. Finally, Edison has done a lot of research in the smart speaker space. Speaking of push, Google Home has done a lot of advertising to explain this whole category to people. And we just recently partnered with NPR with a study called the Smart Audio Report. And one of the biggest findings of this report was that people are listening to audio differently in their homes with the smart speaker. For the first time in years, we're seeing people gather around the radio, almost like it's the 1930s. The families are sitting down together listening, or couples are listening together. And this is really exciting for anyone in digital audio because you can, there's ramifications here for the type of content that you can develop for this space. And this is really an opportunity for podcasting as well. So I'd like to thank you Next Radio for having me here. Please visit Edison Research if you'd like more information about this study. And if you too are a pod person, I would love to talk to you about world domination. Come and find me later today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Megan. Thank you.